Welcome aboard, sailors! Today we're going to get you prepared for our next anchor assignment related to the banned books text that we just read together.
We are going to start off with a graphic organizer. And so before we fill it in, we want you to copy this just how it is in your notebook. And then after you're done, come back to the video and finish watching so we can tell you how to fill it in.
Yep, we're going to go through how to fill it in together, but just pause the video, get it in your notebook first. Alright, Sailor, now that you have this graphic organizer in your notebook, here's an example. We're going to fill this out using Harrison Bergeron as an example. So what you do in this leftmost column is you have to state the rule or law. There are several rules or laws we're seeing in the giver. We're going to use Harrison Bergeron as an example again. And you can just paraphrase or directly quote either one what it is. So we chose to paraphrase a rule from Harrison Bergeron for this example by saying everyone in the society has to be equal by wearing handicaps. That's the big rule that the whole book is based on.
And the one right there is because that's in the very first paragraph.
Yep.
And then we're going to analyze that. So we're going to break it down and talk about why. So equality is the most important goal in society. This is the underlying value. The reason this is a rule is because to this society, equality is the most important thing.
So when we're talking underlying value, think about what is the reason for the rule existing. If this is a rule, equality must be important to the society.
So I like to think back to when you guys were making your own societies and you identified what some problems were that you wanted to get rid of, and then you had to make some laws and some regulations in order to fix that. So you had reasons for those laws, and that was to fix some of the problems. So in Harrison Bergeron, the reason for the handicaps is to fix the problem of inequality.
All right, last is your evaluation of that. You have to state why you disagree with the rule or law, assuming you do, and then form a thoughtful level 3 question to spark a meaningful conversation with your peers. So this is to get us ready for a discussion we're going to have next week. And our response to this law is that we disagree with it, even if equality is important to us. And we don't have a lot of space here, so I'll expand on this verbally. I disagree with this, obviously, because the handicaps took away people's physical autonomy. They couldn't, be themselves and be special. So equality is important, but equality of perhaps opportunity, equality of resources in many ways important, where maybe, we don't have to have equality so extreme that you can't think differently.
But we could have equality of treatment. Instead of saying everyone must be ugly, we could say ugly people and not ugly people can be treated fairly.
Yep. So to turn that into a level 3 question, which remember is a question that takes a step farther even than the inferences from level 2, a level 3 question is about the real world. It goes out of the text and breaks out into the real world. So a level 3 question we could get from this rule is, how could equality turn out to be harmful in our world? In what way could equality maybe go too far? Because Harrison Bergeron is ridiculous and silly on purpose. We're not actually afraid that anybody's going to have to start wearing handicaps in our world. That's not a serious discussion. But it gets us thinking about this idea of, could equality actually turn out to be harmful? So with that said, you're going to do those 3 steps, except of course, you're doing it about the community and the giver.
So think about the social circumstances in the community of the giver. And which rules or laws do you completely disagree with? And you're going to complete this graphic organizer with 3 of the rules. So think of one rule, put it here. Why is that a rule? And then why you disagree with it, and ask a question about how that rule might relate to or affect our society if it was outside the book.
And while this isn't necessarily going to happen, I'm willing to bet that a lot of you are going to find that different rules have very similar underlying values. That's okay. So if this underlying value looks similar for 1 or maybe even 2 to 3 of your rules, that's probably all right, because this society has some very clearly stated underlying values to their rules, some clear goals that they're trying to accomplish. So with that said, go ahead and pause the video now. You'll need to dive back into the text, find 3 rules, their underlying values, and whether you agree, disagree with the rule and why, and 1 level 3 question for each rule.
And please do not hesitate to raise your hand if you need assistance with any of this.
This will probably take you a good little bit, so get to work, sailor. Once you're done, we'll come back here and get you introduced to the anchor assignment. Alright, sailor, now that you've taken the time to fill out this graphic organizer all the way, you have tons of evidence from the text and these page numbers. You have underlying values, and you clearly state your opinions with a level 3 question on each of these rules. It's time to get thinking about our anchor assignment.
So we are going to compare and contrast, because that's what we have been doing for this entire unit. we're going to choose 2 characters and write whether or not they would agree or disagree with banning books in the community.
So your anchor assignment will look like this. So the rubric we're looking at here is the standard of dramatic analysis, basically your ability to analyze elements in a story. So starting at number 4, if your analysis applies inferences, those educated guesses, of how dialogue or incidents in the story cause action, reveal aspects of a character, or provoke a decision, that would be a 4. In a big way, we're focusing here on revealing aspects of a character because those aspects of a character or that characterization is what's going to show us whether or not they would probably want to ban a book.
So then number 3, it just says analysis identifies how dialogue or incidents is a story. And the thing that's missing to make this a 3 and not a 4 is the inferences that you're applying. So maybe you identify exactly what happens in the book, but you aren't really saying, and because this happens, I think that this might happen, or I think that the character feels this way.
You're going to see some analysis that uses inferences in an example later in this video, but just know it's the difference between a character just coming out and saying what they think versus using evidence about a character to help figure out what they think. Now, a 2 is going to cite relevant evidence of dialogue or incidents in the story. So the relevant evidence might not directly identify. It might be a bit of a stretch for us, but we could see how you get to that evidence being helpful, but you're starting to like push the boundary of the evidence actually being useful. So like number 3 here would be if you found a line from a character who's just like, books aren't banned and I don't like them. That would be a 3. A 4 would be you find something about a character that explains how they would feel about books. And then a 2 is the evidence kind of works, and we can see what your idea is, even if it's imperfect.
And then in a 1 is like, we're not really sure what you're saying or how it connects to the question, but we see that you gave it an attempt, and there's some kind of dialogue or there's some kind of something talking about the story, but it doesn't really link back to this question in any way that is understandable.
So, to go through the whole process, we're starting with a feature-by-feature organizer, and you're going to be organizing 2 features here to compare and contrast. First is the characters' attitudes towards their current censorship in the community, and the second is whether or not they are questioning or accepting the society's rules, whether or not they're questioning or accepting what's going on in the community. And we gave you detailed sentence frames for each of these.
So, their attitude towards current censorship, you're going to say character 1, fill in their name there, and character 2, fill in their name there, in The Giver by Lois Lowry, would view banning books and either say differently or similarly.
And you'll go through and you'll notice this green, this yellow, and this red. Yes, it's time to use that answer side explain, the ACE paragraph in full, using it to write full, beautiful 6-sentence paragraphs.
So you'll notice that your first answer side explain is going to be for whoever you put here. This person would view banning books as this, because the book says this, which shows that this, which means that this, because this. And then another answer side explain for that character 2. Again, this character would view banning books as this, the text states this, which shows that, which means that, because.
Now, moving forward to paragraph 2, the sentence frame is a little different. You see this bulleted list, and at the top it says choose one. Just like it says right here, you are choosing exactly one of these sentences for whether they question society, do not question society, or if one of the characters does and the other character does not. So, pick one of these options, put the characters' names in, and make sure that the option you choose actually matches what you're saying. And same deal, you're going to use 2 answer, cite, explain models in full to tie it back to your character. Now, to give you another example using Harrison Bergeron, I'm going to actually write the first paragraph of this, answering the same question, and explain my thinking as we go so that you guys can see what this looks like. So I'm going to answer that same question of choosing the 2 characters and whether or not they would agree with banning books in Harrison Bergeron. The first character that comes to mind for me is the title character himself, Harrison Bergeron. He has some pretty strong opinions. And character 2 that I'm going to get is George. And I'm assuming it's George Bergeron all told, because George and Hazel were Harrison's parents. So,
That is an inference.
Yep. They don't actually say George's last name, but that sounds like a safe inference to me. So, character 1, just like I picked up here, is Harrison Bergeron. And character 2, from here on out, I'm just going to call him George, just like the text does. Seems a little extra to keep putting his last name. So Harrison Bergeron and George in Harrison Bergeron by Kurt Vonnegut would view banning books, and I'm going to land on differently here because I think they would have very different opinions on not necessarily the books being banned, but what exactly they would do about the books being banned. So, starting with Harrison Bergeron, we'll say Harrison Bergeron would view banning books as an insult to his grand intelligence and a completely unnecessary precaution. And then I have evidence, and I already pulled in the evidence just to make this process faster, that says, in the text, Harrison declares, "Even as I stand here, crippled, hobbled, sickened, I am a greater ruler than any man who ever lived." And I'd say this shows that Harrison thinks very highly of himself, which means that he would be against banning books because he would be against anything that limits his remarkable intelligence. And those books help him to become that greatest man who has ever lived. Now, I want to call your attention really quick to this evidence that I used and how that ties into our rubric. So when we said analysis applies an inference of how dialogue or incidents in the story reveal an aspect of a character, this right here requires an inference. Because if you look, this evidence doesn't have Harrison saying, "I would like to read books." Harrison is not sitting here screaming on a stage, "Banning books is wrong. Stand with your librarian." As cool as that would be, we're assuming that because Harrison thinks he is the greatest ruler of any man who ever lived, he probably would have some issues with being told he's not allowed to read a book because it's dangerous. Now, George, on the other hand, would view banning books as a shame, but would never think to fight back. In the text, George says that he will get 2 years in prison and $2,000 fine for every ball I took out. This is something that George points out because he's scared. So I would say that this shows that George is unwilling to rebel against unjust rules, which means that he would accept book bans because he would be afraid of the consequences. Now, this evidence, again, linked into an inference. This lets us infer that George wouldn't be okay with that. Now, to finalize this, I would take this first sentence and each one following and turn it into a neat full paragraph down here. I'm not going to make you watch me do the slow process of copy-pasting it all to make it look nice and neat. Make sure you get it in bold, gone, make it all one nice, neat font, pretty as can be, and turn it into neat paragraphs at the bottom, which is what we expect from you in your actual anchor assignment about The Giver. So we'll be grading the actual 2 paragraphs here. Make sure you don't just have writing in the boxes. Finally, here at the end, let's talk conclusion.
So we're going to wrap it all up with one neat statement that kind of sums everything up, saying these examples show that character 1 and character 2 in The Giver by Lois Lowry would view banning books differently or similarly.
A good conclusion effectively is just like restating your thesis, saying your main idea one last time. With that said, we've given you all the tools you need. Go ahead and dive in, start finding evidence from the text, and compare and contrast those 2 characters. As I'm sure you remember, the model we did had 1 paragraph. This one, of course, has 2. We'll have the model posted for you on Google Classroom if you want to see it as an example. Get to work, sailor!